Getting ready for the Canadian citizenship test? You know, that whole section on government, law, and justice can feel like a lot to take in. Well, in this explainer, we're going to break it all down, connect the dots, and give you a really clear and memorable guide to the stuff you absolutely have to know.
Okay, so we're going to break this down into three main parts to make it super easy to follow. First up, we'll talk about your power and how you elect a government. Then, we'll get into your role, your rights and responsibilities as a citizen. And finally, we'll look at the rules, the system of law and justice that holds everything together.
So let's start with the most direct power you have as a Canadian citizen, the power to vote. Seriously, this is the absolute foundation of our democracy. It's the way we, the people, choose who will represent us, make our laws, and run the country.
So, who gets to take part in all this? Well, the rules are actually pretty straightforward. To vote, you just need to be a Canadian citizen, be at least 18 years old on Election Day, and be on the voters list. And you know what? If you want to run for office yourself, the requirements are exactly the same. The government keeps a database of everyone who's eligible to vote, and before an election, they'll mail you a voter information card that tells you everything you need to know, when to vote, and where to go.
Now, I want you to listen closely to this next part, because this is a huge concept for the exam and a pillar of our democracy. It's the secret ballot. All this means is that your vote is 100% private. Nobody, not your boss, not a government official, not even your own family, has any right to know who you voted for. It's a fundamental protection that makes sure your choice is truly yours without any outside pressure.
So this brings up a really interesting puzzle, right? You vote for just one person in your local community, but somehow that single vote helps decide who runs the entire country. How does that actually work? How do we get from 338 separate local elections to just one national government?
Well, the answer is in our first-past-the-post system. Here's how it breaks down. The whole country is carved up into 338 areas called electoral districts, or ridings. In your riding, you vote for one person to be your Member of Parliament, or MP, in Ottawa. Pretty simple. The candidate who gets the most votes, even if it's not a majority, wins that seat. Then we just do the math. The political party that wins the most seats across the country gets to form the government.
Now, the number of seats a party wins is absolutely crucial. If one party manages to win more than half of them, so 170 or more, they form what's called a majority government. That means they can pass laws pretty easily. But if they win the most seats but it's less than half, they form a minority government. This is where things get interesting, because they need to cooperate and get support from other parties to get anything done. And that party that gets the second most seats, they become the official opposition, and their main job is to question and challenge the government.
All right, so we've seen how we elect a government. Let's move on to the next piece of the puzzle. What does it actually mean to be a citizen, beyond just casting a vote? This is all about the two sides of the citizenship coin, the rights you're guaranteed and the responsibilities you take on in return.
You know, the heart of this whole thing is really the oath of citizenship. When you become a citizen, you make this solemn promise. You swear to be loyal to Canada, to follow its laws, and to carry out your duties. It's a really meaningful commitment you're making to your new country and everyone in it.
When it comes to protecting your rights, the single most important document is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's baked right into our Constitution, and it legally guarantees your basic freedoms. Now here's a date to circle for the test. 1982. That's when the Charter became official, and its very first words state that Canada is founded on principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law.
So, what rights are we actually talking about here? It helps to think of them in a few big groups. First, you have your fundamental freedoms, things like freedom of religion and freedom of speech. Then you have mobility rights, which means you have the right to live and work anywhere you want in Canada. The Charter also guarantees equality rights, so everyone is treated equally under the law without discrimination. It also establishes English and French as our official languages, and crucially, it recognizes the rights of Aboriginal peoples and celebrates our country's multicultural heritage.
But wait a minute, this is a question that stumps a lot of people. If the Charter guarantees all these rights, how come the government can sometimes limit them? Like putting limits on free speech with laws against hate speech? How is that possible?
Well, the answer is actually found in the first section of the Charter itself. It says that our rights aren't absolute. They can be subject to what are called reasonable limits. This means the government can put a limit on a right, but they have to be able to prove in court that the limit is reasonable and necessary in a free society. Things like protecting public safety. It's a constant balancing act between our individual freedoms and the well-being of the whole community.
Okay, this next part is super important for the test. You need to understand the difference between three key ideas: A right is a protection the government absolutely must respect, like your freedom of speech. A responsibility is a duty you have to society, like serving on a jury if you're called to. And then there's a privilege. That's something you earn that can be taken away if you don't follow the rules, like a driver's license. Getting that distinction down is key.
And this brings us right back to where we started. Voting. In Canada, voting is really unique because it's both a fundamental right and a core responsibility. The government has to protect your right to vote, for sure. But our democracy really only works if we, as citizens, step up and fulfill our responsibility to actually participate.
All right, this leads us perfectly into our final section, the legal and justice system. This is the whole framework that enforces our laws, protects our rights, and just makes sure our democracy runs in a fair and orderly way for every single person.
The most important principle in this whole system is something called the rule of law. It's a simple idea, but it's incredibly powerful. Everyone is subject to the law. That means government officials, the police, wealthy and powerful people, they all have to follow the same rules as everyone else. No one is above the law, period.
And within this system, you have some incredibly important legal protections. The first is called habeas corpus. It's a Latin term, but it basically means the government can't just arrest you and throw away the key. They have to bring you before a judge and prove they have a good reason to hold you. Just as important is the presumption of innocence. In Canada, you are considered innocent until you are proven guilty. And this is so critical. You don't have to prove you're innocent, the government has to prove that you're guilty.
Now, our justice system deals with two main types of law. First, there's criminal law. This is for acts that are considered a wrong against all of society, like theft or assault. In these cases, it's the state that prosecutes. Then there's civil law, which is all about private disputes between people or businesses, things like a broken contract. A lot of these smaller disputes get sorted out in small claims court. So you can see, the justice system has two different jobs: punishment for crimes and finding remedies for private arguments.
So where do our laws actually come from? Well, a proposed law starts its life as something called a bill. It begins in the House of Commons, where it has to go through 3 separate debates and votes. If it passes there, it moves on to the Senate for more debate and approval. And once both houses have agreed on it, it gets what's called royal assent from the Governor General. And poof, it's officially a law.
And finally, this is a big one for the test, so make a note. You have to know who's in charge of what. The federal government in Ottawa handles the big, national stuff. Think national defense, foreign policy, and citizenship. The provincial governments, on the other hand, handle things that are closer to our daily lives, like education, healthcare, and highways. Understanding this division of powers is really a key part of the test.
Okay, so let's tie this all together into one big picture. I want you to think of it as a connected system. Your power as a citizen, which you use in elections, creates a government. That government has to play by the rules, operating within a framework of rights that are guaranteed to you by the Charter. And the whole thing is held up by a system of law and justice that applies to everyone equally. See? It's not 3 separate topics, it's one system that all works together.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We've talked about these 3 massive pillars: the power of elections, the guarantee of our rights, and the rule of law. If you had to pick just one, which of those 3 do you think is the most critical one to protect, to make sure we have a healthy, free democracy? It's a tough question, isn't it? Because as we've just seen, they really all depend on each other.